It's the age-old question. Is it better to buy or to rent? Well, it depends on a number of factors, including the current market. And today we're going to dive into those numbers, and there is a definitive answer. And that answer might surprise you. Well, to explore this, we're going to take an example. And we're going to look at a particular home in an area that I am currently living in. This house is a 5-bedroom house, 3-bathroom, with about 3,000 square feet. The cost of the house is about $575,000 today. If we were to rent that same house, the rental prices are at around $2,750. Now, when you first look at this, you always start to think that, hey, I would rather buy that house because over time, I'm going to earn up equity in that house, especially if the mortgage cost is at or about the same price as the rental cost. Why wouldn't you do it? You spend about the same amount of money, you earn a big equity share or that entire value of your home over 30 years. It's a no-brainer. Well, is it? Let's take a look. With that $575,000 home, the first thing you'll need to do is make a down payment. The typical down payment is around 20%. That gives you those lower interest rates. At a 20% down payment, it's $115,000, which then your base mortgage is $460,000. Now, we're about to share some of those more hidden fees. See, when you close a mortgage, there are fees. There's mortgage registration tax. There is origination costs. There's an appraisal that has to be done. And all of that gets charged to you. Now, when you do that, it costs around 2% of the mortgage. So that $460,000 that they gave you to buy the house, well, your mortgage is actually going to be $470,000 or about that once all the dust settles with those additional fees. Now, in today's market, the interest rates are around 6.5% for a 30-year mortgage. That gives you a monthly payment of $2,900. Well, compared to the rental amount of $2,750, it's only $150 more. Dude, this is a no-brainer, right? You should totally buy the house because that house is yours free and clear when you're done. Well, house is still winning here. But let's dig into it a little bit deeper. Now, when you own a house, there are certain fees you have to pay that you don't have to pay if you're renting. For example, your property taxes, which are typically around 1% of the cost of your house that you have to pay every single year. Then you have insurance and maintenance costs, which may be another 1%. So in total, you might have a 2% cost every year to your home. Now, your monthly cost for that house is no longer $2,900, not just your mortgage, but you have to add on another $1,100 in order to cover those extra costs. That brings you up to a monthly cost of nearly $3,900. Oof. Now the numbers are getting a little bit tighter, right? You're paying almost $1,300 more to own a home than to rent that house. But still, over time, you're going to own that house free and clear, and that might still be worth it. So let's take a look at that. Your home over time will generally increase in value. And if you look at the past 100 years, that increase has averaged around 3%. So over the course of 30 years, your $575,000 home is now worth around $1.4 million. That sounds awesome. That's maybe worth an extra $1,000 a month to have $1.4 million in a home free and clear. Now, of course, you don't get all of that money because you have to pay a realtor maybe around 6% to sell that home. So your net proceeds after living in that home for 30 years is $1.3 million. That sounds great. Well, let's look on the other side now with renting your home. So with renting your home, you never had to buy or pay that down payment. So instead, that $115,000, let's invest it in the stock market. So it's $115,000 of investment. But also, you didn't have to pay the maintenance, the insurance, the property taxes. And you can take that savings and also invest that money. So you're investing another $13,000 every single year. Then lastly, there's another hidden expense most homeowners fail to kind of recognize. And that is, on average, people live in their home for about 8 years. Let's round that up to 10 years. So over the course of 30 years, let's say you'll move 2 more times. Now, every time you move, you have to list your home. It's going to cost you about 6% in those realtor costs. And then you've got another 2% for closing the new mortgage on your next home. Let's say, so that's 8%. So at year 10, you would have had to spend about $61,000 because of the appreciation in your home. In year 20, it's another $83,000. But now, because you're renting, you don't have to spend that money. So now you'll invest that money instead. Historically, the stock market returns about 6%. I know many people quote a higher number, the average rate of return at around 8 or even 10%, but those numbers aren't quite real because of the way that that number is calculated. The more real number is around 6%. So being conservative with that 6%. Over 30 years, if you've taken that down payment, that the maintenance costs and things of that, if you've invested that, and if you've invested the cost of those having to sell your home twice throughout that period, your total over that 30 years will turn out to be a little over $2 million. So in today's market, you would actually have $2 million over the course of 30 years rather than just $1.3 million. That's almost 50% more in that you didn't rent out or that you didn't buy your home. What's interesting though is these numbers change with time. In today's market, it is for most people better to rent. And the reason that is because interest rates have gone up, but the house prices have not come down. And rental rates have stayed fairly consistent throughout this time period. Now, that will change. It will change again over the next few years, 4, 5, 6 years, and the market will be different. You have to look at it different at that point. But in today's market, it's cheaper to actually rent than to buy, or you'll be better off renting than buying. But there's one last little tip that I'll throw your way. So we had calculated this return based upon a 6% actual rate of return that you could expect in investing in the market. But what if you could invest it at a higher rate? Let's say 10%. Well, over the course of 30 years, instead of just having $2 million or that $1.3 million, if you invested it at about 10%, you would have nearly $5 million. That's so much more money. And see, this is how a lot of wealthy people actually gain their wealth. They're more thoughtful about that investment. Well, how do you get access to a 10% rate of return? There's a number of alternative ways to do it, including being invested in income-producing real estate. And the company that I work with, Norhart and Norhart Invest, is currently offering investors that 10% rate of return. And I'll drop some information about that and investments in the description below. So take a look at that if you really want to maximize your wealth. But overall, in today's market, I think there's a definitive winner of whether or not you should buy or rent. And that in today's market, renting is going to earn you more income and money overall in today's market.